Nearly every FPS game out there has some sort of defining map that practically ingrains itself within the game's legacy. For Team Fortress 2 it's 2 Fort, for Call of Duty it's Rust, and for Battlefield it's probably Operation Metro. But for Counter-Strike, well, I only have to say one word. Dust. In the late 1990s, Counter-Strike was still originally a mod for Half-Life, being developed by a small team, in fact really only two people at the time, Min Lee and Just Cliff, known as Gooseman and Cliff respectively. With the mod gaining a lot of traction, its creators were having trouble keeping up with the community's demands. The game needed more maps, and while Lee and Cliff were both rather busy with development of the game itself, most of the mapping was left to the community. That's where David Johnson comes in, known simply as Dave J, a mapper originally from England who started his mapping journey even earlier than Counter-Strike. He began with level design in and around 1993 or 1994, with Wolfenstein 3D at the age of around 10 years old. Following this, he would later move on to mapping for Doom and Quake, but admits that most of his level design work lies within Half-Life and other games running on Gold Source, such as 007 Nightfire, and of course, Counter-Strike. CS was growing in popularity, and having already created a map to be featured in one of the earlier beta versions, one of the co-creators of Counter-Strike reached out to Johnson to propose him creating a map for Counter-Strike's upcoming Defuse mode. It's not commonly known, but in the early beta versions of Counter-Strike, only the hostage mode existed, and for the sake of expanding and diversifying the gameplay, the Defuse mode was a good branching point. Dave already had an idea for a possible theme for the map, the seed being planted by some early Team Fortress 2 promotional artwork featuring a dusty, desert environment. Just Cliff put him into contact with a texture artist, Chris Ashton, also known as MacMan. Ashton was the artist who worked on the original urban texture set released with the Counter-Strike mod titled cstrike.wad. Johnson would simply show Ashton the early TF2 screenshots and tell him that that's what he wanted. MacMan got to work on creating a slew of textures that Johnson would combine into a texture pack he titled cs_des.wad, short for Destiny, presumably the original title for his next project. Little did he know, this combination of textures would later be used in quite possibly tens of thousands of other desert-themed community-made maps over the next many years. Dave used those same early TF2 screenshots to develop the first area of the map, which looked nearly identical in design. This area would later become CT Spawn. In the side-by-side shots provided for an early Dust version, the similarities can be seen with a few key differences. Johnson also stated that the arches were a defining factor of the Dust theme, and without them, the map would simply just be another deathmatch arena. I found this quite insightful as an occasional mapper, as I never really thought much about it, but the truth is, Dust most likely did pioneer this intricate arch design for later maps to come. Through this time, Dave J admitted that he felt a little bit lost creating the layout, as most of his past mapping experience was with the aforementioned arena shooters, which usually sported tight, enclosed spaces, whereas Counter-Strike's more realistic competitive approach would contain a balance of both open and closed areas. Moving on, he worked on the underpass area from T-Spawn, which sported a much larger, cavernous design, which he would later slim down considerably after starting over with the area entirely, claiming that the area was too large, empty, and very dark in contrast with the bright, sunny outdoor lighting. Another interesting point to take note of is the small design choices, like the crates in T-side of tunnels. Just these two large crates play a huge role in balance, blocking the CT line of sight to provide Ts with more cover on their approach. Small details indeed, but worth noting for any mapper in future. Momentum picked up and the design eventually came together, creating essentially the same layout for Dust that we all know today. Johnson would send the map off to Cliff for testing. After being approved by the creators, it would later be released in Beta 4.0. Along with the success of the brand new Defuse mode, D-Dust would become a fan favorite, running 24/7 on many servers due to its fresh and easy to navigate design. From Beta 4.0 to CS 1.6, the map would receive some changes to lighting, detailing, and smaller layout changes. This later 1.6 version would be the design that pretty much all later recreations of the map would take on. Dust would continue to be released in every mainline Counter-Strike to date, with the only exception so far being the recent CS2. Over the years, Dust would receive some minor changes again, most notably from Beta 4 to 1.6, but also once Condition 0 was released. The CZ version of Dust was created by Ritual Entertainment with minor adjustments from Valve. The layout would remain nearly entirely the same, but with a fresh coat of paint, new textures and brushwork that would remove much of the blocky design and modernize the atmosphere, like the spires added along the roofs and the blue accents in the texture work to provide a bit more of a pop. Similar can be said for Counter-Strike Source, where the map was remade for the new Source engine. This version would update the looks even further, but would remove the blue accenting and instead revert back to a more neutral dust color instead of the yellowish orange tone the original had due to standard gold source lighting at the time. Dave stated he thought this remake was spot on and really captured the feeling of the original design, just looking much better in a new engine. We then move on to CSGO. As one of the original maps packaged with Global Offensive's release, the map received yet another fresh coat of paint with some minor design changes, mainly the exit from underpass up to overpass and into the tunnels, providing a bit more balance for the T side. Dave also praised this version of the map, stating that his jaw dropped when he originally saw it, running on the same source engine but also looking entirely refreshed from the already beautiful looking version that CSS provided. Unfortunately, dust was removed from the CSGO active map pool and the game files entirely in 2017. Valve stated that this was due to a lack of popularity, but also mentioned the possibility of deleted maps eventually being reworked, although short dust for the wingman mode was added at this time. Dust solidified its place not only in Counter-Strike, but in the hearts of fans around the world, as shown on Dave's website. The map would be recreated in many other games, and even the likeness of the large wooden crates would pop up and were made by an artist in Germany. Although there have been images pulled from the game files of what looks to be a remake of Short Dust, unfortunately, CS2 has been the only mainline Counter-Strike thus far to not feature dust since its inception. Following the creation and success of D_Dust, Dave set out to create a sequel to the original, the idea being to create a worthy successor to Dust that kept the unique theme and design, while also having a balanced layout that was fresh and easy to learn. As Dave put it, it had to be Dust-ish without being Dust. However, there was a bit of a problem. He goes on to state that even with the same theme and distinctive texture work along with the solidified reputation, making a successor to one of the most popular maps for the game at the time was a daunting task. For this reason, he had the idea to originally name the map D-Dust 3. His reasoning being that the third installment of any trilogy was usually expected to be inferior at first, so he wouldn't be disappointing anybody if the map was a flop. After deciding upon the name, Dave booted up Hammer and got to work, of course keeping the same dust theme. The lighting, Johnson stated, was something that he originally wanted to make darker as a nighttime map, but he realized that this would take away most of the defining detail of the map, that being the dust, I guess. Instead, he would state that he consistently tweaked the lighting from the original D-Dust as it kept the theme consistent. As can be seen in the two versions for 1.6, the lighting is pretty much the exact same. Keeping the distinctive design elements from the original was key in making the next installment. Beyond just the textures and atmosphere, things like the archways and large dust doors, ramps and low walls, and just overall being simplistic while still being interesting, which is another great mapping point here by Dave. My understanding is that he's aiming to create architecture that is unique enough to look fresh and appealing, while also being simple enough to remain undistracting and intuitive. Over the next few days, he would create the paper draft for the map into a basic alpha layout in Hammer Editor, but this version would be considerably different from the Dust 2 that we know today, notably featuring a cavern that would have housed Bombsite A, which in my estimation looks to be where CT Spawn ended up turning into. Bombsite B looks similar, but its placement was more centered instead of being pushed to the back corner away from tunnels. Middle near CT didn't have any doors, and there was a corner cutout here with some crates, which I actually quite like. Johnson consulted Gearbox Software's Brian Martell for some advice and feedback, who would suggest adding arrows to point to the bomb sites for clarification, a trivial detail at first that has now made its way as a staple feature in pretty much every official and popular community-made CS map. Moving on to the beta stages of the map, Dave would move around the bomb sites into mostly where they are today, adding the hole leading into Bombsite B and the addition of the famous curved stairs and B tunnels. It's easy to see in comparison shots where he pulled similar areas from the original Dust into Dust 2, like this part of T-Spawn which would have been Dust's Bombsite A, and the underpass area from CT Spawn that was based on Dust 2's T entrance to underpass. Dave has remained quiet the entire time, not to get hopes up within the community. Luckily, Just Cliff insisting that the map be added to Counter-Strike's official rotation under the most aptly named Dust 2. And as of March 2001, Dust 2 was officially part of Counter-Strike and would receive no more layout tweaks beyond this. Unsurprisingly, Dust 2 was a smash hit in the community again, being featured on many servers in a 24/7 fashion, still to this date across literally every playable version of Counter-Strike. Further than this, the map would be featured for clan matches as well, early broadcasted matches between pro and semi-pro players alike. driving its foothold even more. Moving on to Condition 0, Dust 2 would receive its same facelift again by Ritual Entertainment that the original Dust got, using the same textures, lighting, and color palette, providing a much more vivid atmosphere. Some updated brush and model work can be seen as well, but the layout remained pretty much unchanged. The CSS version would be much of the same, heavily updating the brushwork and skybox to bring it up to current graphical standards. Although the layout still remained the same, Valve did some work to edit the proportions of the map to fit the new engine, extending and shortening some areas slightly, but nothing significant enough to truly notice. Most notably added were the physics objects around the map, specifically the barrels on the bomb sites. No doubt to show off Source Engine's new physics capabilities, but proved to be a bit problematic as players would famously use the barrels to hide the bomb once planted. Global Offensive's original version was practically unchanged layout-wise, but again provided significant graphical updates, making the color palette a bit more diverse than just the oranges and yellows from before. This version's colors kind of line up more with Condition 0's more vibrant theme. In 2017, Dust 2 would receive a whole facelift for CSGO, thematic changes to bring it into a new era and give it an overhaul to maintain its freshness. Again, the only small change would be bringing back the semi-blocked view of mid from T-spawn to avoid op shots on CTs crossing to B site, similar to the original design. Which now of course brings us to the latest Counter-Strike 2 release, and like practically all the other versions, there are no layout changes as it's practically a port of the 2017 Counter-Strike Global Offensive version, just with much better graphics provided by the Source 2 engine. And so, Dave Johnson's Dust and Dust 2 would solidify their positions as the most popular maps across all versions of Counter-Strike, reportedly being even some of the most widely played maps in FPS history. It's no doubt the reason for this popularity is due to its visual appeal, simplistic design, and overall recognizability. The map would be remade by fans in many other games including TF2, Call of Duty, Minecraft, and many more. Dust 2 is practically synonymous with CS itself at this point. Now, I love myself a good map, and there's no arguing that these two maps have stood the test of time. Maybe more Dust 2 than the original, but not my personal favorite. Easily still one of my most played maps, especially in my first years of playing CS. Special thanks to Dave for not only cataloging all of this information on his website, but also creating some of the most legendary maps in the game's history. Love it or hate it, Dust and Dust 2 will always have a special place in the hearts of us Counter-Strike players.